I never thought I'd be a headline, especially not 24 hours after my own mother told me I wasn't welcome in her home. It's funny how life works, how the person who gave you life can make you feel like you don't belong in it, only to have the entire world prove her wrong the very next day. My name is Grace Montgomery, and if you're looking for a story about a happy family reunion, you're in the wrong place. This is about the anatomy of a bridge being burned and the unexpected light that comes from the fire. It all started on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic, stormy Tuesday, but a crisp, ordinary autumn morning in the suburbs. The kind of morning where you can smell the neighbors' wood-burning stoves and hear the distant sound of the school bus. I was in my kitchen packing a small gift, a vintage silver locket I'd spent months tracking down for my sister's engagement party. My mother, Diane, was hosting. Diane is the kind of woman who measures her success by the thread count of her linens and the social standing of her guests. To her, appearances aren't just important, they're everything. I had been hesitant about going. Our relationship had been strained for years, mostly because I chose a life she didn't approve of. I'm a social worker. I spend my days in the parts of the city Diane pretends don't exist. I wear thrifted blazers and drive a car that rattles when it hits 40. In her eyes, I'm a constant reminder of a reality she'd rather ignore. But it was my sister's big day, so I reached out. The phone call was brief. "Grace," she said, her voice like ice water hitting a hot pan, "I think it's best if you don't come tomorrow. We've had a few last-minute changes to the guest list. High-profile people, important people, you know how it is, you just wouldn't fit the vibe." I stood there, clutching that locket, feeling the cold metal press into my palm. "You're uninviting me, Mom, to my only sister's engagement?" "Don't be dramatic," she sighed. "It's just a party, I'll send you some photos. Maybe we can do coffee next month, somewhere quiet, away from the neighborhood." That was it. "No, I'm sorry," no explanation that didn't feel like a slap in the face. She hung up, and for a long time I just stared at the wall. The rejection didn't just sting, it felt heavy. It was the final confirmation that in her world I was an outsider. I was the embarrassment she had to hide from her country club friends. I didn't cry. I think I was past that point with her. Instead, I did what I always do when my personal life feels like a wreck. I threw myself into my work. I called my supervisor and told him I'd take the overnight shift at the downtown crisis center. It was a high-stress environment, far removed from the manicured lawns of the suburbs, and exactly what I needed to numb the hurt. The city at night is a different beast. It's loud, raw, and unapologetic. It doesn't care about your vibe or your social standing. By 2 a.m., I was exhausted, fueled by cheap coffee and the stories of people who had much bigger problems than a rejected invitation. I was helping a young mother find a bed in a shelter when the first alarm went off. At first, it was just distant sirens. In this part of town, that's just background noise. But then the smell hit me. Smoke. Thick, acrid, and terrifyingly close. I looked out the window and saw the orange glow reflecting off the glass of the building across the street, a high-rise apartment complex. People were screaming. The chaos was instantaneous. My training kicked in, that cold, analytical part of my brain that takes over when things go south. I didn't think about my mother. I didn't think about the party I was missing. I just ran toward the heat. The next few hours are a blur of adrenaline and ash. The fire department was on their way, but the lobby was already a death trap. I remember seeing an elderly man collapsed near the stairwell. I remember the weight of him as I dragged him toward the exit, the air so hot it felt like it was blistering my lungs. I remember going back in. One of the residents shouted that there were children on the second floor. I didn't feel like a hero, I felt terrified. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. But I knew those hallways. I'd visited clients in that building dozens of times. I knew where the back fire escape was blocked. I knew the layout better than the panicked people trying to escape it. By the time the sun started to peek over the skyline, the fire was under control, but the scene was a war zone. I was covered in soot, my hands were burned, and my lungs felt like they were filled with glass. I was sitting on the back of an ambulance, oxygen mask pressed to my face, watching the news crews arrive. I was too tired to move, too tired to hide. I didn't know then that a local cameraman had captured the moment I crawled out of that side door with a toddler in my arms. I didn't know that the footage was already being beamed across the state. Exactly 24 hours after my mother told me I didn't fit the vibe, I was the lead story on the morning news. The caption read, "Local hero risks everything in downtown Inferno." And back in the suburbs in her pristine white kitchen, Diane was just sitting down with her avocado toast and her tablet, ready to judge the world. She hit the play button on the live stream. Her eyes widened. Her grip on her silver fork tightened. Because there, on the screen, in front of everyone she was trying so hard to impress, was the daughter she had just thrown away. The silence of my mother's kitchen must have been deafening in that moment. I can imagine the way the high-definition screen rendered every smudge of soot on my forehead, every tear in my thrifted blazer. To the rest of the world, I was a guardian angel in the smoke. To Diane Montgomery, I was a PR nightmare, or perhaps a sudden golden opportunity. She has this way of pivoting, a survival instinct that allows her to turn any situation into a reflection of her own supposed excellence. But the news wasn't just showing me. They were interviewing the families. They were talking to the young mother whose child I had carried out. She didn't even hesitate. The woman sobbed into the microphone, her voice cracking with a raw gratitude that you can't fake. She went back in when everyone else was running out. She saved my baby. While the news cycle was spinning me into a saint, I was being poked and prodded by paramedics. My lungs burned with every breath, a reminder of the toxic air I'd swallowed. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, replaced by a bone-deep ache that made my limbs feel like lead. I wanted to go home. I wanted to scrub the smell of charred plastic out of my hair and sleep for a week. But the universe had other plans. My phone, which had been buried in my bag, began to vibrate incessantly. It was a frantic, rhythmic buzzing that signaled a barrage of notifications. I ignored it at first, assuming it was my supervisor or friends from the shelter. But when I finally pulled it out, my heart sank. It wasn't just friends. 13 missed calls from Mom. I stared at the screen, a dry, bitter laugh escaping my throat. 24 hours ago, she couldn't find a seat for me at a table. Now she couldn't stop trying to reach me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. What was there to say? Sorry I couldn't make the party, Mom. I was busy being the headline. I checked my texts. The first few from earlier that morning were typical Diane. I hope you aren't planning on showing up unannounced today. I've hired security for the gate just in case. Then the tone shifted abruptly as the news broke. Grace, my God, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Why didn't you call me? Please call me immediately. Everyone is asking about you. Everyone is asking about you. That was the giveaway. It wasn't about my burnt hands or the fact that I almost died. It was about the everyone. Her social circle had seen her daughter on the screen, and suddenly my vibe was exactly what she needed to boost her standing. I didn't reply. I turned the phone off and let a volunteer drive me back to my tiny apartment. The drive through the city was surreal. I saw myself on the digital billboards over the freeway. I saw people on the sidewalk looking at their phones, likely watching the same clip of the girl in the soot-stained blazer. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. When I got home, I collapsed. I didn't even take off my shoes. I fell into a dark, dreamless sleep, the kind that only comes from total physical and emotional exhaustion. I woke up 6 hours later to a pounding on my door. For a second, I panicked, the smell of smoke still lingering in my mind, making me think the building was on fire. But it wasn't smoke. It was the scent of expensive French perfume, a scent I knew all too well. I opened the door to find Diane standing there. She looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. Behind her, parked at the curb of my crumbling apartment complex, was her white Mercedes. It looked like a spaceship in a junkyard. "Grace," she gasped, reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched instinctively. She didn't seem to notice. "You look terrible. Pack your things. You're coming home." I've already called Dr. Eris, he's going to check your lungs, and I've told the caterers to add a place for you at the engagement dinner tonight. It's going to be a celebration of your bravery." I leaned against the doorframe, my voice raspy and low. "The dinner, you mean the one I was uninvited from yesterday? The one where I didn't fit?" She waved a hand dismissively as if she were swatting away a fly. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, that was before we knew, well, before this. People are calling me, Grace. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. Even the mayor's wife asked if you'd be there. It would be a disaster if you didn't show up. It would look like we aren't close." "We aren't close, Diane," I said, using her first name for the first time in years. She winced, her perfectly manicured eyebrows knitting together. "Don't be cruel, I'm your mother. I'm giving you a chance to be part of the family again, to be seen for who you really are, a hero. Think of what this could do for your career. You could get funding for that, whatever it is you do at that shelter." She was bartering. She was trying to buy my presence with the one thing she thought I couldn't resist, help for my work. It was a calculated move, a masterclass in manipulation. She wasn't there to check on her daughter, she was there to recruit a trophy. "I'm not a hero for your dinner party, Mom," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I'm the same person I was yesterday, the same person who didn't fit. The only thing that changed is the camera." "You're being stubborn," she snapped, the mask of the concerned mother slipping just a fraction. "This is a big night for your sister. Do you really want to ruin it by staying in this hovel? Come home, be the woman I raised you to be." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the desperation in her eyes, not for me, but for the status I now represented. And in that moment, I realized that the anatomy of our relationship wasn't just broken, it was hollow. There was nothing left to save. "I'll be at the party," I said quietly. Her face lit up with a triumphant smile. "I knew you'd see reason. Wear the blue silk dress I bought you last year. I'll have the driver pick you up at 6. She turned and floated back to her car, satisfied. She thought she had won. She thought I was coming back to play my part in her carefully scripted life. But she didn't realize that I had spent the last 24 hours learning exactly what I was capable of. And I wasn't going to that party to fit in. I was going to finish what the fire started. I spent the afternoon not in a spa or a high-end salon, but in the quiet stillness of my apartment, nursing my burns and thinking. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the orange glow of the fire. I felt the heat. But more than that, I felt the clarity that comes when you've looked death in the eye and realized that the opinions of small-minded people are utterly insignificant. Diane wanted a hero at her table. She wanted the prestige. She was about to realize that truth isn't always as pretty as a centerpiece. I didn't wear the blue silk dress she mentioned. It was tucked away in the back of my closet, still in its plastic wrap, a symbol of the version of me she tried to manufacture. Instead, I chose a simple, sharp black suit. It was professional, understated, and it didn't hide the bandages on my hands. I wasn't going there to be a doll, I was going as Grace Montgomery, the social worker who had just walked through hell. When the black town car Diane sent pulled up to the gated entrance of her estate, the security guard, the one she had hired to keep me out, recognized me instantly. He didn't check the list. He didn't ask for ID. He just nodded with a look of genuine respect and whispered, "Good luck tonight, Miss Montgomery, we saw you on the news." The irony wasn't lost on me. As I stepped out of the car, the sounds of a string quartet drifted from the backyard. The air smelled of expensive lilies and wood smoke, the decorative kind, not the kind that stings your throat. The house was glowing, every window lit up to showcase the wealth within. I took a deep breath, ignored the throbbing in my hands, and walked in. The moment I entered the foyer, the conversation in the living room died down. It was like a wave of silence following me. Heads turned, glasses were lowered. These were the important people Diane had mentioned. Local politicians, business owners, the elite of the suburbs. And there was Diane, draped in a gown that probably cost more than my car, rushing toward me with a wide, performative smile. "There she is," she cried out, her voice projecting to the furthest corners of the room. "The woman of the hour, my brave, beautiful daughter." She reached out to hug me, and for the benefit of the crowd, I let her. But as she leaned in, she whispered sharply in my ear, "Where is the blue dress? And why are those bandages so prominent? Couldn't you have put some makeup over the soot marks on your neck?" I pulled back and looked her in the eye. "This is what a hero looks like, Mom. I thought that's what you wanted for your guests." She stiffened, but the mayor's wife was already approaching, her hands clasped to her chest. "Grace, dear, we are all just so moved. To think, Diane, you raised such a selfless young woman. You must be so proud of the values you instilled in her." Diane beamed, preening under the praise. "Oh, you know how it is, Evelyn. Service has always been a cornerstone of our family. I've always encouraged Grace to follow her heart, even when it led her to those challenging neighborhoods." I stood there, listening to her rewrite our entire history in real time. She was painting a picture of a supportive, nurturing mother who had cheered me on from the sidelines, rather than the woman who had spent a decade calling my career choice a waste of potential. It was a masterclass in social climbing. The dinner was served on the back terrace, overlooking a perfectly manicured lawn. I was seated at the head table, right next to my sister, Chloe, and her fiancé. Chloe looked beautiful, but she looked uncomfortable. She kept glancing at me, then at our mother, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and confusion. She knew the truth. She knew I had been uninvited. As the second course was being cleared, Diane stood up. She tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon, the high-pitched ring demanding everyone's attention. "Friends, family, and distinguished guests," she began, her voice steady and practiced. "Today was supposed to be a celebration of Chloe's new chapter, and it is. But life has a way of reminding us of what truly matters. Yesterday, I had a long talk with Grace. We talked about the importance of her work and the risks she takes. And while I worried for her safety, as any mother would, I knew I couldn't stand in the way of her destiny." I felt a cold sensation in the pit of my stomach. She was lying with such ease it was almost breathtaking. "When I saw her on the news this morning," Diane continued, a theatrical tear shimmering in the corner of her eye, "I wasn't surprised, because I know the heart of this girl. I know the strength she carries, and that's why tonight, in honor of Grace's bravery, I am announcing the creation of the Montgomery Foundation for Urban Resilience. We will be partnering with Grace's center to ensure that no one is left behind." The room erupted in applause. People were standing, cheering, looking at Diane like she was a saint. It was a perfect move. She wasn't just using my trauma for social points anymore. She was using it to launch a foundation that she would undoubtedly control, using my face as the brand while she handled the high-profile gala events. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She thought she had trapped me. If I spoke up now, I would look ungrateful. I would ruin the charity and Chloe's night. She thought she had bought my silence with a foundation named after herself. But Diane had forgotten one thing. I don't work in the suburbs. I work in a world where you learn to see the cracks in a facade before the whole building comes down. And I had spent the last 24 hours watching things burn. I waited for the applause to die down. I stood up slowly, the silence returning heavier this time. I looked at the mayor, the donors, and the woman who called herself my mother. "Thank you, Diane," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the terrace. "That is a very generous proposal. A foundation, it's a big step. Especially considering that exactly 24 hours ago you told me I didn't fit the vibe of this very party and had security barred from letting me in." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. I could hear the crickets in the grass and the sound of Diane's sharp, inhaled breath. The anatomy of the lie was finally being dissected, and the truth was about to get very, very messy. The silence on the terrace was heavy, the kind of stillness that precedes a total collapse. I watched the color drain from Diane's face, leaving her perfectly applied rouge looking like splotches of paint on a white sheet. The mayor's wife froze with a wine glass halfway to her lips. My sister Chloe lowered her head, her shoulders shaking, not with tears, but with the relief of the truth finally being out in the open. "Grace," Diane hissed, her voice a sharp whisper that barely carried past our table, though her eyes were wide with a panicked warning. "This is not the time, you're exhausted. You're clearly in shock from the fire. You don't know what you're saying? I know exactly what I'm saying, Mom, I replied, my voice calm and conversational. I turned to look at the guests. It's a strange thing, isn't it? To be told you're an embarrassment on Monday, only to be marketed as a hero on Wednesday. I suppose my vibe improved once the local news got a hold of my face. A low murmur broke out among the guests. I saw a few people leaning in, whispering to their spouses. The perfect image Diane had curated for decades was cracking, and I was the one swinging the hammer. I didn't come here for a foundation, I continued, looking back at Diane. And I certainly didn't come here to help you build your social capital. I came here because I wanted to see if you could look me in the eye after what you said to me. But you can't, can you? You can only look at the camera. Diane stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the stone floor. She tried to laugh, a brittle, high-pitched sound that fooled no one. Everyone, please, my daughter has been through a traumatic event. The smoke inhalation, it affects the brain, she's confused. Perhaps we should move inside for dessert. I'm not confused, Diane, I said, stepping away from the table. And the only thing the smoke did was clear my vision. You see, when you're in a burning building, you don't care about the thread count of the sheets or who's on the guest list. You care about who's standing next to you. You care about the truth. And the truth is, you didn't want me here until I became a trophy you could show off. One of the men at the table, a prominent donor Diane had been courting for months, set his napkin down. Is this true, Diane? You actually barred her from the gate? Diane opened her mouth to lie. I could see the gears turning, but Chloe suddenly stood up. Yes, she said, her voice trembling but clear. It's true. Mom told me she didn't want Grace ruining the aesthetic of the party. She told me she'd handle it. I was too weak to say anything then, and for that, Grace, I am so incredibly sorry. That was the killing blow. Coming from me, it was a grievance. Coming from Chloe, the perfect golden child, it was a verdict. The social atmosphere of the evening didn't just shift, it evaporated. People began to stand up, not to applaud, but to leave. In the world Diane inhabited, scandals weren't resolved with shouting matches. They were resolved with polite, cold exits. The mayor's wife stood first, offering me a small, sad nod. I think we should go, Diane, she said, her tone devoid of its earlier warmth. It seems your family has some real work to do, work that doesn't involve a foundation. Within 10 minutes, the terrace was nearly empty. The caterers hovered near the doors, unsure of what to do with the expensive dessert trays. The string quartet had stopped playing, packing their instruments into velvet-lined cases in a silence that felt like a funeral. Diane stood at the head of the table, surrounded by half-eaten gourmet food and expensive flowers, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The important people were gone. The mayor was gone. Her reputation, the thing she had spent her entire life polishing like a piece of fine silver, was tarnished beyond repair. She turned to me, her eyes burning with a cold, concentrated rage. Are you happy now? You've destroyed everything. I tried to help you. I tried to give you a platform, and you threw it in my face to settle a petty grudge. I didn't settle a grudge, Mom, I said, feeling a strange sense of peace. I just stopped playing the part. You didn't give me a platform. You tried to cage me in a narrative that served you. You never cared about the people I saved. You only cared that I was the one who saved them. You'll never see a dime of that foundation money, she spat. I never wanted it, I replied. The people I work with don't need your name on a building. They need people who show up when things are actually burning, not just when the cameras are rolling. You wouldn't know anything about that? I looked at Chloe. I'm going home. Do you want to come? Chloe looked at our mother, then at me. She picked up her purse from the table. Yeah, she whispered. I think I'm done with the vibe here too. As we walked toward the foyer, Diane shouted after us. You'll regret this. You're nothing without this family. You're just a girl in a dirty blazer. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I had walked out of a literal fire 24 hours ago. Her words were just sparks that couldn't catch. We walked past the security guard at the gate. He was looking at his phone, probably reading the first social media posts about the disastrous Montgomery engagement party. News travels fast in the suburbs, but the truth travels faster. As Chloe and I sat in my rattling car, the engine turning over with a familiar groan, I felt the weight of the last 2 days finally lift. I was Grace Montgomery. I was a social worker, I was a sister. But for the first time in my life, I was no longer Diane's daughter. "Where to?" I asked Chloe. "Anywhere with a drive-through and no dress code," she said, leaning her head against the window. I smiled, put the car in gear, and drove away from the estate, leaving the glowing house and its hollow secrets in the rearview mirror. But I knew this wasn't the end. Accountability is a slow burn, and Diane Montgomery was about to find out that when you build your house out of lies, you're the one who ends up trapped inside. The aftermath of that night didn't feel like a victory in the way they show it in movies. There were no slow-motion cheers, no grand music. It felt like the morning after a storm, quiet, gray, and filled with a lot of debris to clear away. Chloe stayed on my couch for 3 days. We talked more in those 72 hours than we had in the last 10 years. We talked about the pressure of being perfect, the subtle ways Diane had pitted us against each other, and the freedom of finally letting go. By the 4th day, the headlines had shifted. In our digital age, a hero story lasts a day, but a scandal lasts a week. The local tabloids were having a field day. "Socialite shuts out hero daughter," one headline read. Another featured a grainy photo of the mayor leaving the party with a look of pure disdain. Diane's social standing didn't just drop, it plummeted. The clubs she frequented, the boards she sat on, suddenly her name was a liability. People don't mind a bit of ruthlessness in business, but they have a very low tolerance for a mother who rejects a daughter during her finest hour. I went back to work at the center. My boss tried to give me time off, but I refused. I needed the routine. I needed the reality of the streets to ground me. The burns on my hands were healing, leaving behind faint, silvery scars that I wore with a strange kind of pride. They were reminders that I had been tested and that I had held my ground. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the fire, I was sitting in my small office when a man I recognized as Diane's attorney walked in. He looked uncomfortable, holding a thick manila envelope. "Miss Montgomery," he said, clearing his throat, "your mother asked me to deliver this. It's a settlement. She's willing to sign over the deed to the property adjacent to your shelter. It's currently a vacant warehouse. She wants to make things right privately." I looked at the documents. I knew what this was. It wasn't an apology, it was hush money. It was an attempt to buy my public forgiveness so she could start the long process of rehabilitating her image. If I accepted this and stood for a photo op with her, she could tell the world it was all a big misunderstanding that had been resolved with family love and charity. "Tell her no," I said, handing the envelope back. "Grace, be reasonable," the attorney urged. "This property is worth millions. You could house 100 more people. Think of the good you could do." "I am thinking of it," I replied, "and I'm thinking about the anatomy of this gift. It's built on a lie. If I take this, I'm telling every person who walks through these doors that justice has a price. I'm telling them that you can treat people like trash as long as you have enough money to buy a new reputation later. I won't be her redemption arc." When the attorney left, I felt a weight leave my chest. I didn't need her warehouse. The fire had brought so much attention to our cause that donations were pouring in from strangers all over the country. We were going to expand on our own terms with clean hands and honest hearts. The final confrontation happened a month later. I was grocery shopping, a mundane, ordinary task, when I saw her. Diane was in the produce aisle, looking remarkably different. She wasn't wearing her usual designer suit. She was in a simple tracksuit, her hair tied back in a way that looked hurried. Without her social armor, she looked older, more fragile. She saw me and froze. For a second, I thought she might turn and run, but she didn't. She walked up to me, her eyes scanning my face. "I heard you turned down the warehouse," she said. Her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. It just sounded tired. "I did," I said. "Everyone is still talking, you know," she whispered, looking around as if the lemons and kale were listening. "I can't even go to the club. Evelyn won't return my calls. Even the florist won't give me the preferred rate anymore." I realized then that she truly didn't get it. She wasn't sad about losing me or Chloe, she was grieving her preferred rate. She was mourning the loss of the mirrors that told her she was the most important person in the room. You reap what you sow, Mom, I said quietly. You spent years building a world where only appearances mattered. Now that the appearance is gone, you're realizing there was nothing underneath it. I did it for you girls, she snapped, a flicker of the old Diane returning. I wanted you to have a name that meant something. My name does mean something now, I countered. But it has nothing to do with you. It means I'm the woman who shows up. It means I'm the woman who tells the truth even when it's uncomfortable. That's the legacy I'm keeping. I walked away from her then, and this time I didn't look back. I had learned that some fires you have to fight and some you just have to let burn until there's nothing left but ash. Diane's world was ash, and I was no longer interested in sifting through it. That evening, I met Chloe for dinner at a small, greasy diner downtown. We sat in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, eating burgers and laughing until our sides ached. There were no cameras, no high-profile guests, and no vibe to maintain. Just two sisters who had finally found their way back to each other. As I looked at my sister, I realized that the best kind of revenge isn't a headline or a dramatic reveal. It isn't seeing someone lose their status or their money. The best kind of revenge is living a life so authentic, so full of purpose and joy, that the people who tried to diminish you no longer have any power over your heart. My mom uninvited me. 24 hours later, she saw me on the news. But today she doesn't see me at all, because I've finally moved beyond her line of sight into a life that is entirely, beautifully, and truthfully mine. And that is the most powerful anatomy of all.